From Studio C in the 511 studios located in the Brewery District in downtown Columbus, Ohio, this is Note to Future Me. I'm Brett Johnson, owner and founder of Circle270Media Podcast Consultants. In each episode, I interview businesses and organizations who have implemented podcasting into their marketing strategy. Circle270 Media works with entrepreneurs, small to mid-sized businesses, associations, and nonprofits to strategically plan and execute podcast content creation, distribution, and marketing. With over 35 years of experience in broadcasting and marketing, Circle270 Media brings a unique approach to consulting our podcaster clients. Coming up in this episode, I interview Scott McComb, who is the chairman, president, and CEO of Heartland Bank. He is the host of Driving the CBus. Great interview with Scott talking about how he began the idea of the podcast Driving the CBus and who he has talked to so far. And some real exciting news, too, that Circle270 Media will be helping him moving forward with Driving the CBus. It's a great episode. I hope you enjoy it and get some insight on what Scott is doing with this podcast and moving forward, what the podcast will deliver to you, the listener, as well. You can find a complete transcription of the episode at circle270media.com or notetofutureme.com. And if you'd like to be interviewed about your business or organization's podcast, send me an email at podcasts@circle270media.com, or you can go to my website and fill out the contact information form. For more information about Circle270 Media Podcast Consultants and how we can help your business begin or better implement your current podcast into your marketing strategy, contact me at that same email address, podcasts@circle270media.com. Enjoy the episode. So, Scott, a nonprofit you or Heartland Bank likes to support. Tell me about it.
Yeah, that's how much time do we have? That is a extremely large question. Part of what community banking is all about is focusing on the community and what is needed in the community. And because of that, we are sponsors and supporters of well over 100 nonprofit organizations inside of Central Ohio and on a national basis. So some of the larger ones I think that we have supported is we are a big supporter of the USO of Central and Southern Ohio, with the force behind the force, our armed forces, men and women in active duty service. Our big mantra for the bank on an annual basis, we have a golf outing that supports children's charities. So we firmly believe in the principle set by Colin Powell, the Little Red Wagon concept that he had about 15, 20 years ago, where if you can invest in a child's early childhood development type causes, you can make a serious impact, to their lives. And so that brings us to all kinds of different charities that we've supported over the course of time, whether it's Junior Achievement or whether it's the Lutheran Social Services, which is a very diverse group, everything from Meals on Wheels to childhood development to reading and workforce development, to Victory Ministries is another one that we've supported. The Ohio Dyslexic Learning Center for children with dyslexia. It's hard to say today for some whatever reason. So there's just a whole host of ones that we've covered. Special Olympics. I couldn't list them all.
Sure, that sounds good. No, I think there are certain categories of businesses that are obligated. Almost, it's a good thing to do, and you need to do it. It's not one of those, hey, we've got to do this. No, we've got to do this.
Well, community banking is about taking capital inside the community. So we take deposits and investors that are willing to give us their capital so we can provide them a return. Those are our shareholders, right? And then we take depositors' money, loan it out locally to businesses, and it becomes this perpetual circle. Well, one of the things that is super important is benevolence. Making sure that there's a food pantry and that the food pantry has the resources it needs in every community that we serve. Things like that. It's just what community banking is all about.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about your professional background and history up to this point.
Sure. Well, I have a very different background than most folks in my business. So I'm an entrepreneur in the banking world. My father was a career banker. Started off in a finance company, then got into community banking here in town with the Grove City Savings Bank in 1967, and that's when we moved to town. I was 1 year old. I was born in Ironton, Ohio, and came up here. My parents my whole family's from West Virginia, so we are hillbillies, and the rest of the family is still living in the trailer behind the house in the holler. That's just the way it happens, And we were lucky enough to make it out of there through the power of 4-H. So my father actually made it out of the mountains because he got a scholarship to Marshall University to be the captain of the livestock judging team. That was his, and he majored in biology. So very eclectic background there. Wow. We moved to Grove City, Ohio here, and my father ran the Grove City Savings Bank for a guy named Jack Havens, who was one of the founders of modern day Columbus, really, and chairman of Bank One, chairman of the Ohio State University. He worked for him and George Skesto. So anyway, long story short, I was, I finished high school. I was in college. Went to Grove City High School. Went to Ohio State instead of I was either going to go to Ohio State or go in the Marine Corps because I was kind of a troubled youth. I was never really in trouble, but I like to have fun, and I think we've all been there. So I went to Ohio State and I majored in High Street, and High Street
I've heard that twice now on my podcast.
Yeah. So High Street is a great place. You learn to budget, you learn to love, you learn to fight, all those great things, right? So I majored in High Street. Never really even declared a major, until I went back the second time, frankly. So when my father got to a certain point where his bank was sold, he's working for a larger bank. He started Heartland Bank, and he was going to start Heartland Bank Corp from scratch and buy another smaller bank and change the name to Heartland, and that's how Heartland started. So when he did that, though, he realized he had a big epiphany moment in his life where he said, really, Scott, the only way to wealth, the true wealth, is to own a business. And to earn money through equity, earn capital through equity. You can't really save your way to wealth and to financial independence. It's just extremely difficult to do that. So he encouraged me to start my own business as well. So I was, again, majoring in High Street, and he helped me. He helped me start a home and business monitored security system company, and I started that when I was 20. And so I ran that for about 10 years. It was called PFM Alert Systems. That standing for Police, Fire, and Medical Alert Systems. And that sprouted a couple other things. So I sprouted a janitorial business because I didn't make any money in the security business for like the first 4 or 5 years. So to pay the mortgage, I had to clean other offices. And I just so happened he needed a janitor at the bank. So my first job at Heartland Bank, I was the janitor. And so I cleaned the office, the Grove City office, and then we had a Wilson Road office. Then we had a Dublin, 161 Franz Road, Dublin office. I cleaned that. And so I had 3 or 4 different cleaning jobs, and then I started contracting out for other cleaning jobs, and that became a whole business where I had employees and 1099 contractors and that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the security business continued to thrive and do really well. I took the proverbial quarter off of High Street at Ohio State, and because reality was hitting me in the head, and I was starting to do well. I was starting to turn a profit and do those things, and so I dropped out of school and I just ran my business and did really well for about 10 years in that business. I was offered a number to. I was offered an approach to sell the business, and they said, "Well, just write a number on a piece of paper." And I wrote a number on the piece of paper, and they took it. And I thought, damn, I should have probably asked for more money.
One more zero.
Why
not one more zero? Yeah, right.
So anyway, I went to work I sold the business, did really well, paid off all my debt, put away money for the kids' college education, went on to work for corporate America with a company called Vector Security. And Vector is one of the top, 3 probably alarm companies in the nation, and very, very good company. But you can't own any of the company. No one can own any of the company. It's actually a wholly owned subsidiary of the Philadelphia Contribution Ship, which is the very first insurance company that was started by Benjamin Franklin in 1752. So it goes way, 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 way back, and no one owns any of it except for the Philadelphia contribution ship. They paid me very well, but it was very disenchanting because I wasn't building equity again. So I was going to start something else. I gave them 3 months notice and said, guys, this has been great. You paid me really well, took care of me, but I really got to build equity here. I've learned the only way to, true wealth is through owning a business and creating equity through sweat equity and creating value. And so I left there and was going to start something else. And my father and I were on a golf trip in Orlando, Florida. And we're sitting at the bar having a Jack Daniels. That's what him and I like to drink and what we drank together. And I said to him, hey, is there anything I could do for you at the bank? And he said, well, let's talk about that. So he laid out a whole plan of what I would do at the bank, and he agreed to give me a salary, which was 50% of what I was making at Vector Security. But I had no experience in the banking business, and I said, okay, great, let's do it. So I joined him at the bank and as the director of internet banking. So we launched the very first thing was in the technology world, launching an internet bank, or the internet portion of the bank, in 1999, which was pretty revolutionary back in 1999. So I started there, and my entrepreneurial skills that I had learned in the previous decade really just kicked in the banking world. There's not a lot of entrepreneurs in the banking world, and so it was very easy to go in and make common sense decisions, work circles around folks. I mean, because entrepreneurs work 10, 12 hours a day. That's what they do every day. Bankers, not so much. Bankers are usually,
the banker hours
they're
come
kind
true.
of working the banker hours, and not so much anymore. But they back in that time frame, that's the way it was. And so I joined the bank, and I never really gave up any responsibility. I learned the business. I was a teller for a while. I was the worst teller on the planet. I have dyslexia. So I transpose numbers. I can't read really fast unless it's like a financial statement or something like that, But if you threw a box, opened up a box of matches and threw them out, I get within 5 of how many are on the table, just guessing, So I have kind of that going on as well, which is confusing and exciting at the same time. But so I came through the bank, and I kept getting promoted and taking on more responsibility. And I'm a natural salesperson, and I love to build relationships, and so that worked out really well. And I ended up becoming a loan officer and getting a whole portfolio of customers that I brought into the bank, and then they made me the chief operating officer of the bank, like 7 years after I joined the bank. And I thought to myself, wow, if I play my cards right, they might let me run this place. and because I knew my father was going to retire, so I'm coming up through the ranks, but I didn't have my degree. And I'd promised my mom before she died, I lost my mom very early, that I would finish my degree one day. And so I put those two things together, and I decided, this is the time to go do it. So in 2007, I went back to school. And was running the bank as the bank's chief operating officer, and also during the financial crisis, and I was going to school at night at Ohio State, and I ended up graduating in 2009. So in between there, thank you. Yeah. I'm very proud of that. It was a lot of work, a lot of dedication, and then I guess in between there, I went to the Graduate School of Banking at the University of Wisconsin. That was in the early 2000s, like 2000, 2003. A lot of education there. That's really where they teach banking there. You don't learn it in college. You learn it when you get out in the field. And multiple other schools and courses and things in the banking world. So, but I kind of see, my philosophy is that I never stop learning. So I'm kind of like a sponge. I'm afraid that I'm going to fall behind by not constantly figuring out how I can make myself better, or how I can be, find the next thing for my team to execute. So that's kind of my background. It's a lot different than what you'd hear from other folks. Whenever I tell other bankers that, they can't believe it. They just can't believe it. They're like, oh my gosh, no wonder, so much things make sense after that point.
Sure.
Because we don't run our bank like a bank. We're running it like a technology company, like another business. If we want to run in herds with the other banks, then that makes what we deliver a commodity. And most people think banking is a commodity. So I've just charged my team with going after the 3 or 4% of the population that understands value. And if we get those folks in the door, then we've successfully doubled the size of the bank, and we're probably doing pretty well.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go into why a podcast for the bank. Yeah, what do you think about?
Well, again, podcasts are hot. People want to understand. They want snippets. They don't want an hour long, or they want 2 hours long, a dissertation on this or that and the other thing. But they're very interested in the population now understands that knowledge is at their fingertips. Well, that didn't happen. That's only been there for about 11 years, right? 12 years, the advent of the iPhone or the iPod. Besides that, you had the internet, and podcasting really wasn't that popular because it wasn't convenient. You had to be sitting at your desk. Well, now if I'm running, I can listen to a podcast. I'm out doing sit-ups, or I'm out fishing. I'm out, knitting. I'm doing whatever. I can educate myself. And I think there's a whole class of people, a large portion of the population that has that same desire that I have, that, hey, what am I missing? What else how can I stimulate myself besides sit in front of the TV and have somebody lie to me, or try to change my opinion on something or whatever? How can I educate myself and maybe understand culture better, or enlighten, maybe reach a new level of enlightenment? And I think that's what podcasts do to folks. And so I thought that it would be really cool to have a podcast that, where we could pump the bank a little bit, but it's really not about the bank. People don't want to be sold anything, right? That's just not what people want to be sold. They want to confirm their decisions. They want to be enlightened. But moreover, I wanted to let people know, because Columbus is now this one of the hottest cities, east of the Mississippi. I wanted everybody to understand why and how it got that way. And that was the whole part of driving the CBus. So who is driving the CBus? Obviously, CBus is Columbus. But who is driving it, and how did we get here? It wasn't by accident that we got here. And so I've been in this town all my life. And when I have people grow up, younger folks in their 30s, they don't know Jack Havens. They don't know what the Ohio Sports Commission does. They don't understand the place of Kip Morris and the Better Business Bureau and what they've done. They don't understand local radio with Randy Malloy and CD 1025 and what they've been fighting. So I just thought it was a really good topic to start off with. And that was our first line of topics. So now I think we're kind of shifting to where we're going to talk about just business in general, and then some other things that are happening in Central Ohio, and try to keep it going.
You got a team around you thinking about this, brainstorming? Or is it just you solo kind of go, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to do this?
We have a little bit of a team. I was the impetus of the whole team. We have a really crack marketing team. My assistant, Tracy Bayless, is really a crack person and helps out a lot with me brainstorming stuff.
And by the way, she's in the room, folks.
Yeah, she is here, and she just winked at me, so it's cool. And then my daughter, Kaylin, really helped us. She was the producer of driving the CBus, so she has really had an impetus there. We also have a group called Distribution Strategies, which is led by a young gal named Ashley Trout. And Ashley is one of the most creative people in our company. She is able to take all the wild ideas that I come up with and boil them into value. And then execute. Her group executes that value. So she's helped me out quite a bit as well.
Well, good. So from first thought of the podcast to open the mic and recording, how long did that take for you?
It took about 2.5 months.
Okay.
We read some white papers on how to do podcasts. We listened to some podcasts. We had a little focus group, inside the bank of people that listen to podcasts regularly about what they like and what they don't like. And we read one paper I can remember was the impetus. I forget the name of the author or who it was, but basically he said, the most important thing is don't script it. It can be about anything. It has to be in a manageable amount of time. And the most expensive thing that you should really focus on is a really good microphone.
Right.
And those are the things we took to heart. And I kind of created the questions that I would ask. I sent those out to our folks, and I created our first 10 or 12 guests, and Kaylin produced them, and off to the races we went.
So how hard was it to get those first guests when you didn't have a podcast produced, and you're calling them going, I want you to be a guest?
They were so excited. They were just excited to be part of it, and the whole idea that I had was to, obviously you do things not only to tell the story and all that, and you're trying to help the community, but you're obviously trying to help yourself as well, right? I mean, if there's no reward or some sort of gratification or some way that it helps, then what are you doing with your time, right? I mean, we live in that kind of society. So I actually hoped and we actually were able to accomplish where we could take our social media circles and promote the podcast, and we were hoping to marry up with the guest social media circles, and maybe we'll meet somebody new, and maybe somebody will learn something different. And it's so inexpensive. It doesn't take a lot of time. It's there is a craft behind it, and frankly, it's becoming even more and more eclectic over the course of time, with cameras, with all kinds of things where people could look and see. I mean, I actually drove to Cleveland to watch a podcast of things you should know.
Sure.
Which is like super popular.
Yeah.
There's like millions of people that watch things, that listen to things you should know. So she wanted to go and see the podcast. So she drove up there with a friend to see the podcast. I thought, wow, the podcasts have arrived when somebody's going to drive 2.5 hours one way to check it out.
Yeah. And I think we're dealing with a generation that's never experienced, and you and I are at the cusp of it. We can listen to old radio programs. That's what they did. That was the entertainment form at the time. But I think it's really cool that it's kind of going back to that somebody will drive or spend money to sit in an audience and watch 2 people talking or 3 people talking behind a table.
Yeah,
and be entertained. Simple as that. It amazes me that it's come back to that again.
Well, I think
it's great.
that the death of cable is upon us. I mean, it really is. I mean, I think that the sitcom, I think the lackluster of Hollywood, all those things people have better things to do with their time, and now we have books on tape. Mm-hmm. We have all kinds of things. I think the more nonfiction type entertainment models, and inputs are really coming on with this generation. The millennial, everybody wants to throw the millennial generation under the bus about, they sit in the basement and play video games and they're living here until 35. That's not true.
No.
I mean, there's a very, very, very small group of the millennial generation that are doing that.
There's been a piece of every generation that did that.
That's right, exactly.
Every generation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's just wrong. I frankly, we hire a lot of millennials that are at our bank, and if we can get more and more of them, that's what we want to do. And the fact of the matter is they are very focused. They do treasure their time, but because they can use technology, they grew up never having to change a channel. They get up to change the channel. They're not afraid of the technology. So they can run rings around us baby boomers and Xers, and they're just 3 times more effective of what they can do with the tools.
Right.
They don't need as much time to get the same stuff done. Let's face it.
Right. And looking at it as tools too. They have that recognition where Xers and boomers are kind of going, this is still kind of fun. I'm getting sucked in. It's like, no, it's a tool. Stop.
Well, that and also women in the workforce. I'm a big proponent for single moms, and for just women in general. They are able to handle so much more on a different level emotionally, and it's I don't know how to explain it, but they're just more effective. And now that we're having more and more women in the workforce, I think what we're finding that we have, if you take those tools and you put them together, a more decisive, focused workforce with technology. I mean, no wonder we have all the productivity we have, and we're chasing inflation that we can't ever get.
Right. Yeah. So with your busy schedule, how did you figure out a publishing schedule? How many times per month, every week? How did you figure that out? What did you want to do?
Yeah, my schedule is very hectic. And so what we were able to do, though, is do it in spurts. So like I would set up 3 in a row and do 3 in a row, produce them, and then we would wait to launch them. So we did them in spurts when my schedule would allow. So I have summertime is a decent time to do those. The spring and the fall are usually very, very busy with travel for me because I have some national positions. And then the winter, I like to spend some time in Florida and get out of these Ohio winters. But we were able to do them, in spurts. And so I think we had a total of maybe 5 recording sessions for 12 podcasts. Okay. And it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. I think a lot of podcasters do the batch recording. It's just easier. It fits the schedule. As long as it's not time sensitive, it's okay. It works out just fine.
It's not time sensitive, but that's the thing. If your topic is about current events, though, then you
can't do it.
You can't do it, and if you're going to do something, have segments about current events and things, and that it wouldn't work
any
out
references
so well.
to it.
That's right.
This coming summer, got to edit that out.
Right,
okay,
exactly.
But it happens. Yeah. You talked about social media between yourself as well as guests. What was the social media strategy, at least for your podcast? Which channels to use? Which social media you've seen work real well, and maybe one's like, kick that to the curb. It's just not working.
Yeah, we have. We're very active on social media, primarily for the bank, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Not so much on Instagram, and not so much on Pinterest. We've really used those three things along with our website. So we have a lot of customers, because they're doing internet banking and paying bills and checking their balance. Very active website, and so we were able to push those things out on those mediums. Never really did a press release per se. We just kind of wanted to put it out there and let people start to see and see what kind of reaction we got. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we want to maintain our reputation risk as a financial institution. It was very important that Scott didn't get out there and say something that would offend people at the, that are depositors or whatever. So we wanted to be very sensitive to that. But at the same time, I think my customers, they bank with us because they know who we are and we're very transparent, and we're just going to say what we feel, and we believe that everyone else should be able to say what they feel, and
sure.
No big deal. But those are the mediums that we really chose, and so we drove those, kind of a very regimented, preemptive announcement for each launch. So, one that's going to launch on Saturday, well, we would hit the media, hit all those mediums and say, okay, this is coming on Saturday, and then maybe one or two more, posts about that coming up, and then it's live, and then we're, back into square one again, waiting for the next episode to be launched.
Yeah. And you're using YouTube as basically the platform.
Yep.
Why did you choose YouTube?
Well, it's just where we had videos already. Okay. So we have various interviews from me and other mediums. And what we would hope is that because everything was already there, that they would see this and then maybe go to see some other things that had to do with the bank and get to know us and what a community player and a community supporter we are.
Gotcha. So your current setup for studio, quote unquote, what's it like? Describe it.
It is basically the Amarine conference room at Heartland Bancorp.
Okay.
So it's just a basic conference room, not a big one. And we don't do anything special. We have, my daughter Kaylin plugs in microphones into her laptop, and we have two microphones there that are $150 a piece. So that's our total cost, and a little piece of software, and that's it.
Yeah, good. So she does the editing as well then too.
She does the editing. We try not to do a ton of editing because we really want it to be real and conversational and I think podcast listeners understand that they don't want it to be too scripted. They want people to kind of speak off the cuff and talk about things that come to their mind and be very genuine in their delivery of the material.
Sure. So what are your biggest challenges in creating the podcast?
Biggest challenge is my schedule and lining up with Kaylin's schedule, and then and because that's not what she does full time. So this is like an add-on to her thing. So we really don't have somebody that we've hired to specifically do this, that does that for a living and such and so forth. So that was a big challenge getting it going. Another challenge of getting going was getting buy-in internally. So, I do a lot of things where I don't have a lot of buy-in because I think that I'm going to create the buy-in. So I lose as many times as I win, but I'm not afraid to lose on the aspect that you have to take risk in order to win. And so I think everybody knows that at the bank, that I'm willing to jump out and do something new to see what happens and try it and see how effective it might be. So that was a little bit of a thing. People kind of were like, I don't know what that's going to be about, and what kind of reputation risk do we take? What's he going to say? Nobody ever knows what I'm going to say, and I kind of like it that way, So, but those are a few things. Besides that, we really didn't have any challenges. It was very smooth. And once we did the first couple episodes, people were like, "Hey, when's the next one? What's the next one going to be about?" Or, "Hey, here's a suggested guest you could have." Or, "I really like this," and we got a lot of feedback, a lot of likes. social media really took to it, and I think we really accomplished what we set out to do.
I think that leads into the next question about advice for businesses, not necessarily in the banking industry, but any business interested in podcasting. From your experience, what you've had to do internally, not again, businesses are like yours, but they're going to run into those walls of internal, really want to do that? What advice would you give?
Well, I mean, a lot of folks will say, well, geez, you only had 35 people listen to that. That's not very much. Well, have you ever done direct mail? Well, so you're going to send out 5,000 things. You might get 10 phone calls. Well, it's better than direct mail, right? And it's cheaper. So before you shut the door on it and you decide never to do it, why not try it? I mean, I think the big thing is that they have to have a commitment to it to keep it going over time. Even if you did one or two a year or three a year, and you're talking about your business and what you did and everything else, there's nothing bad, I think, that can come from that unless you get, too political, or if you with your business, because maybe your business is only going to cater to people on the left or whatever. Then that's fine if that's an angle that you're going to go for.
Oh, you bet. Yeah.
But you do take some risk in that regard. Besides that, I really don't see any downside to people telling their story, because especially in Columbus, for instance. In Columbus, people support local ventures, and they want to know your story. And part of what we even tell our Heartland Bank associates is go out and tell your Heartland story. This isn't a mechanical thing. You're helping make this story over the course of time. Go tell your story, and people will become believers. I truly feel that any business can do that as well. I mean, if they are ethical, if their associates are taken care of properly, and they have a positive attitude, and they have the utmost in integrity, I really think you could take this medium and make it work for you.
Yeah, because you can't fake what you just did.
No,
you can't. No. It's from the heart. Yes, there are actors that can put on the voices and such, but we're not actors. No. We've not been trained to do so, but I think the inhibitions come down, and you just want to talk and talk about yourself, and talk about the story, and talk about helping people.
Right. Yeah, they definitely don't have short, fat, bald actors. That's for sure. So I would not be an actor.
So without giving away too many secrets, possibly, maybe vagueness, some future plans for the podcast, where do you want to go with it?
I'd be more than happy to tell you where we're going. We're an open book. Where I want to go is I want to find someone to help us be more professional in putting it on. I'd like to kind of true it up a little bit more with taking on a challenge of going to some of the other things, like if we had a video thing of it, a video portion of the podcast, not everyone maybe, but certain ones. I would love to talk about different strands of conversation. So not just about driving the CBus, but taking driving the CBus as an impetus to have some conversations that have different threads, whether that's an industry thread, whether that's a local thread, maybe that's a national thread, maybe it's a nonprofit thread. Who knows? Just some of the things that I'm involved with to be able to help the people that we associate with continue to grow their communities and get the word out and talk about their challenges and their victories. And so that's kind of our next step. We're trying to I think we figured out that we're going to take it not only to a business segment where we're going to talk to our customers about their business, not about how they bank, but about their business and challenges they have with their business and successes and what works and what doesn't, that kind of thing. As well as a more industry-focused piece that'd be a different angle. It said might even a separate podcast where we talk to industry experts and service providers and that kind of thing, and just about what's happening in the business and appeal to the banking community as a whole on a national level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think any way you can kind of peel away some mysteries of what banks can do, whether it's the B2C or the B2B, it's good. I mean, just and again, this will time this podcast, but just with the school admissions scandal, I mean, that stuff happens because there are so many layers of mystery.
That's right. Well, I don't know if we want to get started on that. It was just nice to see the IRS, the FBI, and the Justice Department actually take some people down there breaking the law.
Right.
And I mean, not only breaking the law, but they're just dishonest. I mean, these are people that don't have to do it.
That's what's the head scratcher about it is. That's exactly
so
right.
I'm going to ruin my life and my kids' life and everything else just because I wanted them to have this status, when they can buy status, right? They
can. For the amount of money that was being thrown around, they could have donated to get their kid in.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
It's really, it's crazy.
But I think this forum helps bring back those layers that you can understand the banking business.
That's right.
Because there are a lot of misconceptions about it, and I think podcast is a really good way to bring back saying, you know what, I remember Scott talking about that on his podcast.
That's right. Well, we find our customers all the time just don't understand the why. They need to understand the why. So when we go to talk to folks, about banking and such and so forth, we're just not going to come back with a yes or a no. I never want to come back with just and I fight that every day. As the bank gets bigger, our culture is the most important thing to us and to our board of directors. As soon as that changes, we're going to have issues. I'm not going to let that change. So we want to go and tell customers how it can be a yes, not a no, but how it can be a yes, because they have to get that from someplace. They're not getting it from their accountants. They're not getting from, their suppliers and everything else. They have to have somebody telling them, look, this is what has to happen for you to get to the next level. Me giving them more money could be the nail in the coffin. Okay.
Right.
That's really, I could kill somebody with a loan, just a company with a loan, just as soon as we can help somebody with a loan. So that's really what we want to try to provide folks. And I think that the why behind banking it would be very, very revealing. Like right now, the history books are being written wrong about the financial disaster, for instance, how it occurred, what happened. The big bad TARP, and that was just such a bad thing. That's all fiction, and I lived it. I was going to Ohio State after majoring in High Street, right? We talked about that earlier. Right. All through that section, that would be a whole nother, we could do something on the financial disaster with people that lived it, and say, hey, this is how the Big Short occurred. And it would be fascinating to folks because it's not what you see on TV.
And you'll have a following for it. People love that stuff that was not covered properly.
That's right.
They love it. They love it. And we're in a generation that instant information is there, that you can Google it up and find what you hope is the truth, or at least differing views, and then it's up to you to come up with the right stuff.
That's right.
In your mind, whatever you want to believe. Yeah.
Well, getting it from the people that lived it, I think, is about the most real way you can get that information.
Exactly.
But everybody, in today's world, it seems like in one of my podcasts, I was interviewing someone from the media. They'll remain nameless. Somebody does their homework, they can find out who it is. But the fact of the matter is, that person said to me, I said, what do you think what's going on in the media these days and all that? And I said, what's happening to journalism? He says, what do you mean? I said, well, it seems to me like everybody that has an interview has a preconceived notion, and they're asking questions to validify their preconceived notion. And he said, oh, that's the way they teach that's the way they've taught journalism for the last 20 years. I'm like, what happened to reporting the facts? He says, well, that's not what it's about. Journalism is about, developing an axiom or a thought or a theorem and then proving the theorem through your questioning. I said, that's not journalism. What happened to...
That's muckraking. Ultimately, I guess.
But anyway, that's what he said, and I didn't want to queer the podcast, right? So I'm like, okay, no, we're not going to do that, and so we changed the topic, went on something else.
That's interesting. Well, and again, I think that's the uniqueness of podcasts. You can go down a rabbit hole, which we're doing right now, which I have no problem with at all, because it validifies what this whole thing's all about.
That's right.
It's just interesting conversation. Find out more about you. Find out more about. I want to listen to this podcast now. Scott sounds like a pretty good host. They must be pretty good. You've referenced a couple. That's the thing. That's what it's all about, as well as, being a proponent with my radio background as well, too. It's just a really easy access form to talk to your future or current customers, too.
That's right. Well, it's all about relationships. The world's about relationships. People want to do business with folks that they know, like, and have respect for, and can
accessible.
They can have trust.
As well.
They can have trust.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being a part of the podcast. I really appreciate it. It's good to know you better about where the podcast has been and going, and our listeners at least can have an opportunity to know what to expect in the future too, which is fun.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's been a pleasure being here. I love your studio. Everything that you've got here is great, and promoting the whole basis of this podcast was very interesting to me because it really hit me as being, I would love to talk about that. I did it. It was easy. It was, and it can open up doors for you. So I appreciate being able to tell my story. Thanks very much.
You bet. Thank you.